The first indication that something was wrong came on a Tuesday evening. I had just returned home from a grueling 14-hour shift on an oil rig. I'm exhausted and all I want is a hot shower and my wife's warm embrace. However, when I walked through the door, the house was dark and empty. "Susan," I called out, turning on lights as I walked through our modest ranch-style home. No response. When I pulled out my phone to call her, I noticed a text from earlier. "Girls' night out. Do not wait. XO." I frowned and threw my phone onto the kitchen counter with more force than necessary. This was the third girls' night this month. When did Susan become so popular? And on a Tuesday no less, I'm shaking off the nagging feeling in my stomach. I grabbed a beer from the refrigerator and collapsed on the couch. That's fine. I told myself she can have a social life. Just because I work long hours does not mean she has to stay at home waiting for me. But the days turned into weeks, that nagging feeling intensified into a 9. I was unable to shake my anxiety. Susan became more distant. She spends less time at home and gives only vague explanations for her frequent absences. When we were together, she appeared distracted, often staring at her phone with a small smile on her lips. I attempted to dismiss it as paranoia. After all, I'd never been a jealous person. Susan and I had been in a happy marriage for 8 years. Why would this suddenly change? But no matter how hard I tried to rationalize it away, the unease remained. It all came to a head one sunny Saturday afternoon. I was cleaning out my truck in preparation for a fishing trip with my buddy Randolph. The following day I vacuumed under the passenger seat. Something caught my eye. A crumpled receipt wedged between the seat and the center console. Curious. I took it out and smoothed it flat. My blood ran cold as I read the details. A receipt from the Riverside Inn and Suites from a weekend. 3 weeks ago, when Susan claimed to be visiting her sister in the next state for an extended period of time. I just stared at the damning piece of paper, refusing to believe what it was telling me. But as the initial shock subsided, a cold fury rose in my chest. I'd been taken for a fool. I stormed into the house ready to confront Susan, but she was not home. Of course she wasn't. Taking deep breaths, I forced myself to think logically. I needed more evidence before confronting her. If she was deceiving God, I hoped I was mistaken. I needed to be wise about this. I called Randolph. My voice tightened as I explained the situation. "I need your help, man," I said. "I believe Susan has been lying to me and I need to know for sure." Randolph let out a low whistle. "Damn, Jason. That's quite heavy. What do you need? You are the tech whiz." I said, "Is there any way I can track her phone or something? See who she's been talking to?" There was a pause at the other end of the line. "Are you sure about this, Jay? Once you go down this road, I'm sure I'll cut him off with my voice. I need to know the truth, Randolph. Whatever it is," he exhaled. "All right, man, I'll come over in an hour. We will figure this out." Randolph delivered on his promise, arriving with a laptop and an expression. He helped me install spyware on Susan's phone while she was out running errands. It didn't feel right. Invasive. But I suppressed the guilt. If she had nothing to hide, she had nothing to worry about. The following few days were torturous. I went through the motions at work, constantly thinking about what might be on Susan's phone when I got home each night. I'd lock myself in my home office and go over the information Randolph's program had gathered. At first, it was nothing too incriminating, just a lot of texts and phone calls from a number I didn't recognize. Then came the photographs, intimate shots, clearly not intended for my eyes. Finally, we have the smoking gun, a voice message from Susan to someone named Clive Adams. "I miss you already." Susan's voice sounded through my computer speakers. "Last night was incredible. I cannot wait to see you again, baby. I love you." I sat stunned as the gravity of her betrayal washed over me. It was not a one-time fling or mistake. She was in love with this man. How long was this going on? How many times had she lied to my face, kissed me goodbye and then bolted into his embrace? The rage that had been simmering for days finally erupted. I slammed my fist against the desk, relishing the sharp pain that ran through my hand. It was nothing compared to the pain in my chest. I don't remember much of what followed. I know I drank a lot. I'm sure I ruined some things. In my office, smashing picture frames and hurling books. And I'm sure Susan knew something was up. When she came home that night and found me sitting in the dark living room with a tumbler of whiskey in my hand. "Jason," she said hesitantly, flicking on the light. "What is wrong? Why are you sitting in darkness?" I looked up at her, taking in the woman I thought I recognized. She was gorgeous. My Susan had long chestnut hair, bright green eyes, and a smile that could light up the room. How often had that smile been a lie? "Sit down," I said. My voice was gravely from the whiskey and unshed tears. "We need to talk." She paled, clearly sensed the impending storm. "Jason, whatever you think, sit down," I growled, leaving no room for debate. She slumped into the armchair across from me, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "What is this about?" rather than answering. I took out my phone and pressed play on the damning voice note. Susan's voice filled the entire room. "Professor ING expresses her love for another man." As she listened, the color drained from her face. When it was over, she opened her mouth, likely to spew some bullshit excuse, but I interrupted her. "Don't," I said, raising a hand. "Don't even try to lie your way out of this. I know everything, Susan. I've seen the texts and photos. I know about your weekend trips with this Clive asshole while you were supposed to be visiting your sister." Tears came to her eyes. "Jason, please listen." "What are you listening to?" I roared and jumped to my feet. The whiskey glass shattered against the fireplace as I threw it across the room. "Listen to how you've been sleeping with another guy for who knows how long. Explain how you have been lying to me every day. Go ahead, Susan. I am all ears." She flinched at my outburst, shrinking back into her chair. "I apologize," she whimpered. "I never intended for this to happen. It started as a harmless flirtation." "And then?" "And then what?" I demanded. "You just fell into bed with him." "Fell in love with him? How long has this been going on, Susan?" She couldn't meet my eyes. "A year," she whispered. The words hit me like a physical blow. A year, 12 months of lies and betrayal. I felt sick. "Why?" I asked, my voice breaking. "What did I do wrong? What does he have that I don't?" "Nothing," she insisted, finally looking up at me. "You didn't do anything wrong, Jason. It's not about you. It's don't give me that bullshit." I snapped. "This has everything to do with me. You made a vow, Susan, for better or worse. Remember, was that all a lie, too?" She shook her head frantically. "No, of course not. I love you, Jason. I do. It's just Clive. He made me feel alive again, desired. I know it's no excuse, but you're right." I cut her off coldly. "It's not an excuse. Nothing you can say will excuse this." We lapsed into silence, the weight of her betrayal hanging heavy between us. I paced the living room. I tried to process everything. Susan remained in her chair, silent tears streaming down her face. Finally, I turned to face horror. "Is there anything else I should know?" I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. Any other bombs you'd like to drop? She hesitated, and I knew there was more. What is it? I demanded. Susan took a shaky breath. I'm pregnant, she whispered. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard her, but the look on her face confirmed it. My wife was pregnant, and she didn't know if the baby was mine. The room spun around me as the full impact of her words hit home. I stumbled back and collapsed onto the couch as my legs gave out. Jason? Susan's voice sounded distant. Jason, please say something. I looked up at her, the stranger with my wife's face. In that moment, all I felt was cold, hard hatred. Get out, I replied quietly. She blinked, confused. What? I said, get out. I roared and jumped to my feet. Get out of my house. I cannot even look at you right now. Susan scrambled to her feet and moved away from me. Where am I supposed to go? She asked, her voice small and terrified. I do not give a damn. I spit. Go see your sisters. Go to the hotel. Or better yet, run to your beloved Clive. Simply get out of my sight before I do something I'll regret. She hesitated for a moment before fleeing upstairs. I heard her moving around and packing a bag. 10 minutes later, she was back down. Her eyes were red and puffy. Jason, please. She tried one last time. Can't we discuss this? I did not even look at her. There's nothing to talk about. You've made your choice. Now deal with it. The front door opened and closed. And just like that, she was gone. I stood there in the silence of our once happy home, feeling as if my entire world had just collapsed as the adrenaline from the confrontation wore off. Exhaustion struck me like a freight train. I walked upstairs to our bedroom. My bedroom now, I assumed, and collapsed onto the bed. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, it was accompanied by nightmares of Susan in the arms of another man. The next few days were a blur of anger, pain, and far too much whiskey. I called in sick at work, unable to face the idea of pretending everything was normal. Instead, I hid in my house, ignoring calls and texts from concerned friends and family. My mother was the one who finally broke through my self-imposed isolation on the third day of my bender. She arrived at the house, armed with Tupperware containers full of food, and a determined gleam in her eye. Jason Michael Cooper, she called out as she entered using her spare key. I know you are in here. You cannot hide from your mother. I groaned from my seat on the couch. An empty bottle of Jack was resting against my chest. Go away, Mom, I muttered. I am not a good fit for this company. She appeared in the living room doorway, examining the mess with a critical eye. Empty bottles littered the coffee table and the stench of stale cigar smoke hung in the air. Oh, Jason, she sighed. Her expression softened with sympathy. What did the woman do to you? Before I could protest? She was dragging me off the couch and directing me to the bathroom. Are you going to take a shower? She announced firmly. Then you'll eat something that isn't liquid and contains 80 proof. After that, we will talk. I knew I shouldn't argue with my mother when she used that tone. 20 minutes later, freshly showered and feeling slightly more human, I sat at the kitchen table while Mom was busy reheating some of her famous chicken noodle soup. Now, she said, placing a steaming bowl in front of me. Tell me everything. So I did. I spilled the whole sordid story. My suspicions, the evidence I'd gathered. Susan's confession and the shocking pregnancy announcement. Mom listened without interrupting, her expression becoming stormier with each new revelation. After I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I'm very sorry, sweetheart." She spoke softly. "You did not deserve any of this." "What am I going to do, Mom?" I inquired, hating how small and weak my voice sounded. "How can I just move on from this?" She was silent for a moment. "Consider taking it one day at a time," she said finally. "And you remember that you are not alone in this. You've got me. You've got friends. We will get you through this." As if on cue, a knock on the door. Mom proceeded to answer it. Susan's mother returned a moment later accompanied by Shelley. I tensed expecting a fight. But Shelley marched right up to me and wrapped me in a fierce hug. "I'm so sorry," she said. Her voice full of emotion. "I'm not sure where I went wrong with that girl, but please believe me when I say I never raised her to act like this." I awkwardly patted her back, unsure how to react when she backed away. Her eyes blazed with righteous fury. I have half a mind to drive over to my sister and drag Susan back here by her hair, she declared, make her face the consequences of her actions. "Shelley," my mother said, warning me. "That won't help anyone right now." Shelley deflated slightly. "You're correct, of course. I can't believe she'd do this to get rid of a good man like Jason for some homewrecker." I cleared my throat, uneasy about the direction the conversation was taking. Have you spoken to Susan?" I asked hesitantly. Shelley's face darkened. "Oh, I've spoken to her." "All right, that girl is lucky I didn't tell her to hide. Like I did when she was younger, pregnant or not. In my opinion, she is still young enough to benefit from a good spanking." Despite everything, I felt a small smile forming on my lips. Shelley had always been a force of nature, and it was strangely reassuring to know that some things had not changed. Another knock on the door interrupted the conversation. This time Randolph appeared, concerned and slightly out of breath. "Sorry for barging in," he said as he entered the kitchen. "I have been trying to reach you for days, man." "You okay?" I nodded. I am grateful for his concern. "I'm surviving," I said. "Thanks for stopping by." Randolph sat down and nodded respectfully to my mother and Shelley. "So what is the plan?" he asked, getting straight to the point. "What do you intend to do about all of this?" I exhaled. "Honestly, I have no idea. I can't even get my head around all of this." "Well, the first thing you should do is get a paternity test," Shelley stated firmly. "If that baby isn't yours, you shouldn't be responsible for it." I nodded slowly. It was the logical next step, but the thought made my stomach turn. "Yeah, you're correct." "Oh, I will call the doctor tomorrow, set something up, and you should consult with a lawyer." Mom added that even if you decide to try to work things out, you should protect yourself. I hadn't even considered reconciliation. The mere suggestion of it sparked a new wave of rage within me. "There's nothing to work out," I stated coldly. She made her decision. Now she can deal with the consequences. An uncomfortable silence fell over the kitchen. Randolph finally spoke up. "Whatever you decide to do, man, I have your back. We all do." I glanced around at the people gathered in my kitchen, my mother, mother-in-law, and my best friend. They're all here to support me. No questions were asked. For the first time in days, I felt a spark of hope. Perhaps I can make it through this. After all. "Thank you," I spoke, my voice rough with emotion. "All of you. I'm not sure what I would do without you." Over the next few days, with the help of my impromptu team, I began to pull myself together. Mom practically moved in, ensuring I ate and took care of myself. Randolph assisted me in gathering and organizing all of our evidence for the lawyer and Shelley. Bless her. She took it upon herself to interfere with Susan, answering her calls and attempting to contact me. A week following the confrontation, I found myself sitting in a sterile doctor's office awaiting the results of the paternity test. Susan sat across the room, pale and drawn. We had not spoken since she arrived. The doctor assumed a somber expression on his face. My heart dropped before he even opened his mouth. I knew exactly what he was going to say, Mr. Cooper. He began with a gentle voice. I'm afraid the test results indicate that you are not the biological father of Mrs. Cooper's child. Despite my suspicions, the word struck me like a physical blow. Hearing it confirmed made it more real than it had previously been. I closed my eyes, fighting back the nausea that threatened to overtake me across the room. Susan let out a choked cry. Jason, she pleaded. Jason, please look at me. I opened my eyes and fixed her with a cold stare. What would you like me to say, Susan? Congratulations. I hope you and Clive are extremely happy together. She flinched as if I had slapped her. It isn't like that. She insisted. Jason, I made a horrible mistake, but I do love you. We can work through it. Please give me another chance. I laughed. A harsh, bitter sound that surprised even me. Another chance. Are you kidding me? You gave up 8 years of marriage for a brief affair with some wealthy man and now you're expecting his child? There are no more chances, Susan. We are done. Without saying anything else, I stood up and walked out of the office, ignoring Susan's tearful pleas behind me. I made it to my truck before the shock subsided and anger erupted in a roar of frustration. I slammed my fist into the steering wheel repeatedly until the pain in my hand equaled the agony in my chest. I don't recall the drive home. Next thing I knew, I was sitting in my living room. A bottle of whiskey in hand, I stare at the wall of photos that document our life together. 8 years of memories, each tainted by her betrayal. In a fit of rage, I stood up and started tearing the photos off the wall, smashing frames and ripping up images of our happy, oblivious faces. By the time I finished, the floor was littered with broken glass and torn paper, a fitting metaphor for the breakdown of my marriage. Randolph discovered me slumped on the floor, surrounded by debris, with the now empty whiskey bottle dangling from my fingers. Jesus, Jay, he muttered, carefully navigating his way through the chaos. Come on, man, let us get you cleaned up. As he assisted me to my feet, I looked at him, blurrily. She's pregnant with his child. Randy, I slurred. What the hell should I do now? Randolph's face hardened. You're going to pull yourself together, he stated firmly. And then we'll make sure that bitch and her lover pay for what they did to you. His words cut through the alcohol-induced haze, sparking something dangerous within me. You're right, I said. My voice was low and determined. No more feeling sorry for myself. It's time to fight back. The next morning, nursing a killer hangover but fueled by a renewed determination, I met Randolph at a small diner on the outskirts of town. We required privacy for what we were about to discuss. All right, I replied. We ordered coffee and ensured that no one was listening in. What do we know about Clive Adams? Randolph took out his laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard. I did some digging, he said. Clive Adams, 42 years old, is the CEO of Adams Enterprises, a real estate development company. He has a reputation as a bit of a playboy, but nothing concrete has ever stuck with him. I scowled. So he makes it a habit to seduce married women. Randolph nodded. Looks like it. Over the last 5 years, I've met at least 3 other women in similar situations. He wines and dines them, convincing them to leave their husbands. And then, well, let's just say things don't end well for the women. My hands clenched into fists. That son of a bitch, I growled. He's going to pay for this. Both of them are. I'm with you, man, Randolph said. But we need to be smart about this. Clive's got money and connections. We can't just go after him directly. I nodded, forcing myself to think rationally. You're correct. We need more information, more evidence of what he's been up to for the next few hours. We pored over everything. Randolph had managed to dig up on Clive Adams, bank records, business dealings, social media posts. Anything that might give us an edge as we were wrapping up. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I opened it, my eyebrows raising as I read the message. What is it? Randolph asked, noticing my expression. I showed him the phone. It's from someone named Clifton. Loomis says he's a journalist and wants to talk to me about Clive Adams. Randolph frowned. I think it's legit. I shrugged. Only one way to find out. I called the number and a gruff voice answered. Clifton Loomis here. This is Jason Cooper, I said. You wanted to talk about Clive Adams. There was a pause at the other end of the line. Not over the phone. Loomis said finally. Meet me at the Blue Moon Cafe in an hour. Come alone. The line went dead before I could respond. I looked at Randolph, who nodded. Go, he said. I'll keep digging. But take care, man. We're not sure who this guy is or what he wants. An hour later, I was sitting in a booth at Blue Moon Cafe, nursing a cup of coffee and trying not to appear as nervous as I was. A man in his mid-50s slid into the seat across from me, with salt and pepper hair. And the look of someone who had seen his fair share of hard times. Jason Cooper, he inquired, his tone matching the one I'd heard on the phone. I nodded. Clifton Loomis. I believe. He grunted in agreement, then leaned forward, his voice low. I hear you have a beef with Clive Adams. I tensed. How do you know about that? Loomis smirked. I am a journalist, kid. It's my responsibility to know things. I've been tracking Adams for years, trying to nail him. But he's elusive. Always a step ahead. So why come to me? I asked. Still wary. Because you have something that I need. According to Loomis, personal experience provides a first-hand account of how Adams operates. And I'm guessing you want something to avenge. I studied him for a long time, considering my options. Eventually, I nodded. Okay, I'm listening. What do you propose? Loomis laid out his plan to expose Clive's operations, revealing not only his philandering ways, but also some of his shadier business deals. All he needed was my story to tie everything together. Loomis said, I can't promise it will fix everything, but it will certainly make Adam's life difficult. Might even bring him down completely. I thought about Susan, the baby she was carrying, and the life I imagined we had together. Then I thought of Clive Adams. Smug and self-assured. He believed he could do whatever he wanted without consequences. I'm in. I said, my voice hard and determined. Let's take him down. Loomis ran off and I worked tirelessly for several weeks to gather evidence and build our case against Clive Adams. We discovered an extremely disturbing pattern of behavior. Not only were there affairs, but there was also financial fraud, intimidation tactics, and hints of violence against women who threatened to expose him. Susan attempted to contact me several times. calling, texting, and even showing up at my house once or twice. Each time I shut her down. Completely. I wasn't interested in her apologies or tears. In my opinion, she was equally guilty as Clive. Randolph was the one who finally pointed out the obvious. You know, he said one night while we were reviewing some financial documents. Susan might be our secret weapon. She knows information about Clive that could be crucial in bringing him down. I objected to involving her, but I had to admit Randolph was right. I'm swallowing my pride. I agreed to meet with Susan. We met in a neutral location, a park close to our old house. Susan was already present when I arrived. She sat on a bench, her hands resting on her slightly swollen belly. The sight of her pregnancy made my chest tighten, but I pushed it aside. Jason, she said, standing as I approached. Thank you for meeting with me. I cut her off. Save it. I replied coldly. I'm not looking for reconciliation. I need information on Clive Adams. Her face dropped, but she nodded. What would you like to know? For the next hour, I grilled her on her relationship with Clive. Dates and locations. Whatever she may have overheard about his business dealings to her credit. Susan answered everything. Without hesitation, even providing information I hadn't thought to inquire about. As the meeting came to a close, Susan reached out with her hand hovering over mine. Jason, she spoke softly. I understand you hate me right now and you have every right to, but I want you to understand how sorry I am. I wish I could take it all back. I jerked my hand away, but you cannot. I said. What's done is done. Thank you for the information, Susan. I hope it helps nail that jerk to the wall. I turned to leave, but her voice interrupted me. What are you planning to do? She asked. Her tone suggested fear. I returned her gaze with an impassive expression. I am going to destroy him. I replied simply. And if you find yourself in the crossfire, remember that you made your own bed. Now lie in it. With that, I walked away, leaving Susan alone on the bench. Her hand is still outstretched towards me. Randolph was able to hack into Clive's personal email a few days later, which completed our plan. What we discovered there was the smoking gun. We needed emails detailing his schemes and affairs, as well as discussions about how to deal with women who threatened to expose him. Armed with this wealth of evidence, Loomis was prepared to publish his expose. But before he could, we received an unexpected visitor. I was at home reviewing the final draft of the Loomis article when there was a knock on my door. I opened it to discover Clive Adams himself standing on my porch. His face was red with rage. Do you think you can mess with me, Cooper? He snarled and pushed past me into the house. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I stood my ground and stared him down. I know who I'm messing with. I replied calmly. A coward who preys on innocent women. A fraud who is about to receive exactly what he deserves. Clive's eyes narrowed. Is this so? Okay, let me tell you something. You pathetic little man. I've ruined men who were better than you. By the time I finish with you, you'll be lucky to get a job flipping burgers. I laughed coldly and mercilessly. Go ahead and try it. But first, you might want to check your email. I have a feeling you'll be too busy to worry about me. Confusion flashed across Clive's face, followed by dawning horror. As he realized what I was saying, without another word, he turned and fled, almost tripping over himself. In his haste to reach his car, as I watched him leave, a sense of satisfaction settled over me. The trap was set. Now all we had to do was spring it. The next morning, Loomis's article made the front page of every major newspaper in the state. The story quickly spread and was picked up by national news outlets. Clive Adams's carefully constructed world collapsed around him within hours of the dust settling. I sat in my living room watching the fallout on the news. Clive was facing several criminal charges. His company was in disarray, and the women he had used and abandoned were coming forward in droves, each with their own tale of manipulation and betrayal. Randolph appeared at my side and handed me a beer. "We made it, man," he said, clinking his bottle against mine. "We got rid of that jerk." I nodded and took a long pull from the bottle. "Yes," I said. "Yes, we did." But as I watched Clive being led away in handcuffs, his face twisted with rage and disbelief, I realized something. The victory seemed hollow. It did not take away the pain of Susan's betrayal. It did not mend my broken marriage or restore my lost trust. Randolph seemed to understand my mood. "You okay?" he asked. His expression was one of concern. I exhaled. "I do not know, man. I thought this would make me feel better, as if it would fix everything." He nodded sympathetically. "It's not so simple, bro. But hey, it is a start, right? You stood up for yourself. You did not let them get away with it. That is something." I managed a small smile. "Yeah, I suppose you're correct." As the news cycle progressed to the next big story, I found myself at a crossroads. The previous few months had altered me in ways I was only beginning to comprehend. I was tougher. Now, less trusting. But I was also stronger. I had overcome the worst betrayal imaginable. Now it was time to figure out what would happen next. The road ahead was uncertain. But for the first time since the nightmare began, I felt prepared to confront it. Whatever life throws at me next, I knew I could do it. After all, I'd already endured the worst. Everything else was merely details. Clifton's article appeared on newsstands that morning. I awoke to the sound of my phone buzzing constantly. Bleary-eyed, I fumbled for it, squinting at the screen. There are dozens of missed calls and messages. What the hell? I opened the first message, which was a link to an online news article. The headline caused my heart to race. Clive Adams. A tech mogul revealed a web of deception, fraud, and intimidation. "Holy shit, *T, I muttered, frantically scrolling through the article. Everything was laid out in black and white. Clifton had done an excellent job combining the evidence we'd gathered into a damning expose. Photos, email excerpts, financial records. Everything was there. My phone vibrated again. "Randolph, do you see this?" His excited voice came through as soon as I responded. "Yeah," I replied, still trying to process everything. "Wow, is the word. It truly is beautiful." Randolph raised his voice. "Jay, that bastard is going down. We did it." A smile appeared on my face. "Yeah, we did." As the day progressed, the story exploded. Every news channel, website, and radio station seemed to be focused solely on Clive Adams and his spectacular fall from grace. Around noon, the doorbell rang. I opened it and saw Clifton standing there, haggard, but triumphant. "We've created quite a shitstorm," he remarked in greeting. I nodded and ushered him inside. "This is one way of putting it. Come inside. Have some beer. You seem like you could use one." We sat in my living room. The TV muted in the background as commentators debated every aspect of the scandal. So I said, grabbing a long pole, "For my beer. What does the fallout look like?" Clifton's eyes gleamed. "It's beautiful, kid. Adams Enterprises stock is in freefall. Half of his board has already resigned, and get this. His wife has filed for divorce this morning. She must have known about some of his indiscretions for years, but this was the final nail in the coffin. I cannot say I blame her. Any word from the man himself? So far, there has been radio silence according to Clifton, but my sources say he's holed up with his lawyers, figuring out how to save his ass. Good luck with that. Right then, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered with trepidation. Hello. Do you think you are clever? Clive's voice, tight with barely controlled rage, emerged from the speaker. You and your hacked journalist friend. I put my phone on speaker. I exchanged a glance with Clifton. I'm not sure what you're talking about, Clive. I said calmly. Do not play dumb with me. You're a little shit. He snarled. I know you are behind this. You've made a huge mistake, Cooper. I am going to destroy you. I laughed harshly and mercilessly. Destroy me with what? Clive. Your reputation is in ruins. Your company is failing. Face it. You're done. You don't know who you're dealing with. Clive hissed. I still have friends in high places. When I'm done with you, you'll be lucky to land a job flipping burgers. Bring it. I growled. I am not afraid of you, Clive. You are nothing but a bully and a coward. And now the whole world knows. I hung up, my hand shaking slightly as I placed the phone down. Clifton whistled softly. Oh, that was intense. You okay? I nodded and took a deep breath. That's correct. I'm good. Just it's all becoming real, you know. He clapped my shoulder. I get it. But listen, kid. You did well. We exposed a predator. Whatever happens next, remember that. As if on cue, my phone vibrated with a text message from my boss at the drilling company. I need to see you at my office tomorrow morning, urgent. I showed Clifton the message. I got a sinking feeling in my stomach. Clive's claim of having high-ranking friends appears to be genuine. Clifton's face hardened. You were aware that this might happen. Are you ready for it? I squared my shoulders to meet his gaze. Bring it on. I'd rather flip burgers with a clear conscience than work for people on Clive's payroll. The next morning, I walked into my boss' office, head held high. Sit down, Jason. He said, not meeting my gaze. I remained standing. I will stand. Thanks. What is this about, Frank? He exhaled. Finally, looking up at me. You understand what it's about. This entire mess with Clive Adams. The company is getting a lot of criticism. Jason, investors are nervous. We must distance ourselves. Are you suspending me? I replied flatly. Frank nodded, visibly uncomfortable, just until it all blows over. It's not personal. Do you understand? It's only business. I laughed bitterly. Nothing personal. I exposed a sexual predator and a fraudster. And I am the one being punished. That is an impressive sum. Frank, Jason, please, he pleaded. My hands are tied here. Adams still has a lot of influence in this industry. If we do not play ball. I raised a hand, cutting him off. Save it. I do not want to hear your excuses. I took a USB drive from my pocket and tossed it onto his desk. That includes documented evidence of every transaction this company has ever had with Clive Adams, every contract, email, and under-the-table agreement. Frank, I'm thinking very carefully about your next move. His face turned pale as he stared at the innocuous-looking thumb drive. Are you in? Are you threatening me, Jason? I smiled. All teeth. No warmth. Not at all. I'm just giving you all the facts, so you can make an informed decision. Now, please excuse me. I have some packing to do. I walked out of his office without looking back, ignoring the stares and my coworkers' whispers as I cleared my desk. Allow them to talk. I knew I had done the right thing, and that's all that matters. As I drove home, my phone rang. Susan's number appeared on the screen. After a moment of hesitation, I responded, "What do you want, Susan?" Her voice was shaky and on the verge of tears. "Jason, please, I need to talk to you. Can we meet?" I sighed and pinched the bridge of my nose. "I do not think that is a good idea. Please," she begged. "Everything is falling apart. I do not know what to do. You are the only one who might understand." Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her at a downtown coffee shop. When I arrived, I nearly didn't recognize her. Gone was the polished, well-dressed woman I had married. In her place sat a pale, disheveled figure with red-rimmed and haunted eyes. "You look like hell," I spoke bluntly, sliding into the seat across from her. She gave a weak smile. "Hello, too. What do you want, Susan?" I asked. "Let's cut to the chase. I'm not here to hold your hand or hear your excuses." Her face wrinkled. "I know. I wasn't sure where else to turn. Everyone has turned their back on me. My friends, coworkers, and even my own mother will not return my calls." I leaned back and looked at her calmly. "And what were you expecting? You made your bed, Susan. Now you must lie in it." "I understand," she whispered. "I know I messed up, but Jason, you have to believe me. I never intended for any of this to happen. Clive, he wasn't who I assumed he was." I snorted. "No shit. He's a manipulative jerk who preys on vulnerable women. And you fell for it completely." Her eyes welled up with anger. "That is not fair. You don't remember what it was like. How he made me feel. How did he save it?" I cut her off. "I am not interested in your justifications. You had a choice, Susan. You chose him over me, over our marriage. You are responsible for everything that has happened since then." She deflated. Tears streamed down her cheeks. "You're correct. I know. You're correct. I'm not sure what to do now. I'm pregnant alone and everyone despises me." I almost felt sorry for her, almost. But then I remembered the pain she'd caused me, the lies, the betrayal. My heart hardened. I stood up and said, "That is no longer my problem. You made your decision, Susan. You now have to live with them." As I walked away, I heard her call out, "Jason, please wait." I paused to look back at her. "What?" I apologize." She spoke barely above a whisper. "For everything." I nodded once, acknowledging her words, but not accepting them. "Hello, Susan." As I walked out of the coffee shop, I felt a weight lifted off my shoulders. It was not forgiveness. I didn't think I'd ever be able to completely forgive her, but it provided closure. A final chapter in that part of my life. My phone vibrated with a text from Randolph News that had just arrived. "The feds have brought Clive in for questioning. It's happening, man." A smile appeared on my face. The wheels of justice were turning, maybe slowly, but inexorably. Clive. The day of reckoning was approaching, and I'd be there to watch him fall. the weeks after Clive's exposure were a blur. I found myself in the midst of a legal maelstrom, juggling depositions and meetings with lawyers while fending off Clive's team's increasingly desperate attempts to discredit me. Randolph was always there for me, providing support and strategic thinking. We were in his home office, looking over some financial documents when he brought up the subject I had been avoiding. "You know," he said carefully, "we might need to consider bringing Susan into this." I stiffened. My jaw clenched. "Absolutely not." Randolph held up his hands placatingly. "Hear me out, Jay. She was closer to Clive than anyone. She might know things, details that could be crucial to nailing this bastard once and for all." I shook my head vehemently. "No way. I'm not letting her anywhere near this. She's made her bed. Let her lie in it." "I get it, man. I do," Randolph said, "but think about it. If her testimony could put Clive away for good." I slammed my hand down on the desk, making him jump. I said, "No, Randolph, end of discussion." He nodded, backing off. All right. All right. It was just a thought." We lapsed into an uncomfortable silence. The only sound, the shuffling of papers. After a few minutes, my phone buzzed, unknown number. "Hello," I answered wearily. "Jason, it's Madeline." "Madeline Reeves. We met at the, I remember." I cut her off. Madeline was another of Clive's victims. The one we'd used to get the damning recording. "What's happening?" Her voice was tight with tension. "I need to talk to you in person. It's important." 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from Madeline in a quiet corner of a local park. She looked nervous, constantly glancing over her shoulder. "What's this about, Madeline?" I asked. She took a deep breath. "Clive contacted me. He wants me to recant my statement, says if I do, he'll make it worth my while." My blood ran cold. "He's trying to buy you off." She nodded miserably. "I don't know what to do, Jason. I am scared. You don't know what he's capable of." I leaned forward, my voice low and intense. "Listen to me, Madeline. I know exactly what he's capable of. That's why we can't let him win. If you back down now, he'll just keep doing this to other women." "Is this what you want?" Tears came to her eyes. "No, absolutely not. What if he comes after me, after my family?" I reached out and squeezed her hand reassuringly. "We will not let this happen. I promise you, Madeline. We are going to bring him down, but we'll need your help to do it. Can you maintain your strength for a little longer?" She wiped her eyes and squared her shoulders. "I believe so. Yes, I am capable of doing this." I nodded in approval. "Good. Now I need you to tell me everything. Every detail. From your conversation with Clive, we are going to use this against him." As Madeline described Clive's clumsy attempts at witness tampering, a plan began to emerge in my mind. We could make use of this. Use Clive's desperation against him. I was so caught up in our conversation that I didn't notice the figure approaching until a shadow fell over us. I looked up, my blood rushing to my eyes. Susan stood there with one hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. Her eyes darted between me and Madeline, a look of hurt and anger on her face. "Well," she explained, her voice brittle. "Isn't it cozy?" I stood slowly, positioning myself between Susan and Madeline. "It isn't what you think, Susan." She laughed in a harsh, bitter tone. "Oh, Jason, what exactly am I thinking? You've moved on very quickly. That while you're destroying my life, you're getting cozy with other women. Madeline began to speak, but I stopped her with a look. This was my mess to fix. Susan, you don't get to play the victim here, I said with a low voice. You gave that up when you decided to mess around with Clive. Madeline is helping us put together a case against him. That is all. Susan's face crumpled, and tears streamed down her cheeks. I made an error, Jason. How many times do I need to say sorry? I felt a flash of sympathy which was quickly replaced by the memory of her betrayal. Sorry does not cut it, Susan. Not this time. She wiped her eyes and her expression hardened. Okay, if that is how you want to play it. But remember this, Jason. I know things about Clive that could blow the case wide open. If you want my assistance, you'll have to give me something in return. I stared at her, barely recognizing the woman I once loved. Are you blackmailing me? She shrugged, a cold smile playing across her lips. Call it whatever you want. Think about it, Jason. I'm offering you the opportunity to eliminate Clive for good. All I ask for is a fair shake during the divorce. Drop the alimony demands. Split our assets 50-50 THS. That is my offer. I felt a surge of rage. My fists clenched at my sides. Susan, you've got some nerve. After all you've done. Save it. She cut me off. I'm no longer the naive little wife, Jason. I have learned a few things from Clive. So what will it be? Do we have a deal? I glared at her. My thoughts racing. I hated having to admit it. She might have the information we need, but could I trust her? I will think about it. I finally said it. But do not push me, Susan. You're already on very thin ice. She nodded, appearing satisfied. Okay, fair enough. You know how to contact me once. You've made your decision. As she walked away, I returned my attention to Madeline, who was watching the exchange with wide eyes. I am sorry you had to see that. I spoke tiredly. She shakes her head. No, I believe I understand why you're doing all this. It's not just about taking out Clive. Is it? It is personal. I nodded. That's correct. It is personal. However, this does not change what needs to be done. Clive needs to be stopped, no matter what. Madeline stood gathering her belongings. I understand. And I'm with you, Jason. Whatever you need. As I watched her walk away, my mind was already racing, formulating our next move. Susan's offer hung in the air. A tempting but dangerous proposition. I knew I needed to tread carefully. Back at Randolph's place, I filled him in on the encounters with both Madeline and Susan. Randolph let out a low whistle. Damn, man, that's a lot to process. What are you thinking? I paced the room. I don't know Susan's offer. It could be a game changer, but can we trust her? Hell no. Randolph said emphatically. That woman's proven she can't be trusted. But he paused, considering, maybe we can use this. Play her game, but on our terms. I nodded slowly, a plan forming. You're correct. We'll make her think we're playing ball, but we'll be ready for any double cross over the next few days. We carefully orchestrated our approach. I reached out to Susan, agreeing to meet and discuss her terms. The meeting was set for a neutral location, a conference room at our lawyer's office. When I arrived, Susan was already there, looking composed but nervous. Our lawyer, Hugo Jacobs, sat at the head of the table, his face impassive. Let's get down to business, I said, taking a seat. You said you have information that could help our case against Clive. I'm listening. Susan leaned forward. Her voice low. Clive's not just a womanizer. He's involved in some seriously shady business deals, money laundering, insider trading. You name it. I've seen documents. Over her conversations. I can prove it. I exchanged a glance with Hugo, who nodded almost imperceptibly. All right, I said carefully. And in exchange, you want a fair divorce settlement? Is that all? She hesitated, then shook her head. There's one more thing. I want immunity. Whatever comes out about Clive, I don't want to be implicated. I was just a pawn in his game. Jason. You have to believe that. I felt a surge of anger, but forced it down. That's not my call to make, Susan. But if your information is as good as you say, I'm sure the doll will be willing to cut a deal. She nodded, appearing satisfied. All right, then. Do we have an agreement? I stood extending my hand. We have an agreement. But let me be clear, Susan, if you're playing us, if this is some kind of trick, I will not hesitate to bury you right alongside Clive. Understood. She flinched at the steel in my voice, but took my hand. Understood. As we left the meeting, Hugo pulled me aside. You positive about this, Jason? Trusting her is a big risk. I nodded. I understand, but it is a risk we must take. Just make sure everything is legal. I do not want any surprises. The following few weeks were a blur of activity. Susan came through with her information, revealing a wealth of evidence against Clive, bank statements, recorded conversations, and even photos of Clive interacting with known criminals. It exceeded our expectations. Randolph and I worked tirelessly with Clifton on the legal team to build a solid case. The net was closing in on Clive, and we all felt it. Then, just when we thought we had things under control, the other shoe dropped. I was at home reviewing some documents when my phone rang. It was Clifton. His voice was tight with urgency. Jason turned on the news now. I fumbled for the remote and turned on the television. My heart sank when I saw Clive's face on the screen. His trademark smug smile in place. Allegations against me are totally false. He claimed that this was nothing more than a smear campaign orchestrated by a disgruntled former employee and his unstable wife. I have evidence that will completely exonerate me, and I eagerly await my day in court. I swore loudly and slammed my fist into the coffee table. How in the hell did this happen? We got him. Clifton's voice was, I'm not sure, man, but we need to regroup quickly. This could blow the entire case wide open. I nodded. My mind is already racing. All right. Call Randolph. Get Hugo on the phone. We need to meet right now. An hour later, we were all in Hugo's office. The atmosphere is tense. Okay. Let's break this down. Hugo stated, always the voice of reason. What exactly does Clive claim? Randolph, who had been typing furiously on his laptop, finally spoke up. He claims that all of the evidence against him was fabricated and that Jason and Susan conspired to frame him as a form of revenge. I felt blood draining from my face. That is insane. We have solid proof, Susan's testimony. Hugo raised a hand. His expression was grave about it. I just hung up the phone with Susan's lawyer. She's retracting her statement. The room erupted into chaos. I stood my chair clattering on the floor behind me. What? How could she? That bitch. I will kill her. Jason, calm down. Hugo spoke firmly. This is not over. We still possess the original evidence. The testimony of the other women. We can fight this. I took a deep breath and forced myself to think rationally. You're correct. You're correct. So what are our next steps? Clifton spoke up. His eyes were gleaming with the investigative fire that I had come to recognize. We need to know what Clive has on Susan. Why did she flip? There has to be more to this story. Randolph nodded in agreement. I can look into their recent communications. See if there is a trail we can follow. Do it. I said whatever it took. We've come too far to let Clive slip away now, so we dispersed with our assigned tasks. I couldn't get over the feeling that we were missing something. Some critical piece of the puzzle. That would make everything come together. Little did I know that the missing piece would be revealed in the most unexpected way. The courtroom was packed and the air was thick with tension. I sat at the plaintiff's table. Hugo remained by my side as we waited for the proceedings to begin. Clive sat across the aisle with his high-priced lawyers looking smug and confident as the judge called the court into order. I couldn't help but look at Susan sitting in the gallery. Our gazes met for a brief moment, and I was surprised to see fear in her eyes. Not the fear of being exposed as a liar, but something deeper, more primal. The trial began with each side presenting their opening arguments. Hugo was masterful, presenting our case with precision and passion, but Clive had a good lawyer as well. Spinning a tale of conspiracy and false accusations, the jury appeared unsure. Then came the moment we all dreaded. Susan was called to the stand as she was being sworn in. I leaned over to Hugo. This is it. I whispered. If she sticks to her retracted statement, we're screwed. Hugo nodded. Let us hope your ex-wife experiences a crisis of conscience. Clive's lawyer approached Susan with a predatory smile. Mrs. Cooper, please tell the court about your relationship with Mr. Adams. Susan's voice was barely audible when she began speaking. Clive and I had an affair. It lasted for approximately a year, and did Mr. Adams ever force you to do something you didn't want to do? Susan hesitated, her gaze darting to Clive and then to me. No, she said finally. Everything was voluntary. I felt my heart sink. She was following the script. Just as we had feared. Clive's attorney pressed on. Mrs. Cooper, in your initial statement, you claimed that Mr. Adams coerced you into the affair by threatening your husband's career. Do you stand by that statement? The courtroom held its breath. Susan looked like she was ill. Suddenly she burst into tears. She sobbed. I can't do this anymore. I can't continue lying. The judge banged his gavel and the courtroom erupted in whispers. Order, order in the courtroom. Susan looked at me directly. Her eyes were filled with a combination of fear and determination. Jason, I sincerely apologize. I should have told you the truth from the start. My thoughts raced. What truth? What exactly was she talking about? Mrs. Cooper? The judge spoke sternly. If you have anything to say, please address the court. Susan took a deep breath and squared her shoulders. Your Honor, I want to change my testimony. The truth is that Clive Adams coerced me into an affair, but the threats weren't limited to Jason's career. He threatened to expose some financial irregularities in the company where I worked. I helped cover up irregularities. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Clive's face turned an unsettling shade of red as he yelled at his lawyers. The judge repeatedly banged his gavel, signaling for order. I sat there stunned. Financial irregularities. Susan had done something illegal. Hugo grabbed my arm. "This changes everything," he hissed. "If we can corroborate her account." But I barely listened. My gaze was fixed on Susan as she continued her testimony, recounting various tales of corporate fraud, blackmail, and manipulation. She portrayed Clive as a master puppeteer, manipulating people's flaws and mistakes to his advantage. He was aware of the discrepancies in our books. Susan spoke louder now. He threatened to expose me if I did not do what he asked. Initially, it was only information about the company. Then he wanted more. I felt a rush of emotions wash over me, including rage at Susan for her deception, disgust at Clive's manipulations, and grudging admiration for her bravery and finally coming clean. Clive's lawyer stood up and objected vehemently. "Your Honor, this is all hearsay. We have no evidence of the alleged threats or financial irregularities." But Susan wasn't done. "There's proof," she stated firmly. "I kept records, emails, and phone recordings. I was afraid. I'm afraid that one day Clive will turn against me, so I protected myself." The judge looked down at Susan. "Mrs. Cooper, would you be willing to turn over these records to the court?" Susan nodded. "Yes, Your Honor, they are in a safe deposit box. I can get them here within an hour." The judge called a recess to retrieve and review the new evidence. I sat there with my mind reeling. Hugo was already on the phone, giving orders to his team to get those records as soon as possible. Randolph slid into the seat next to me, and I barely noticed it. "Holy shit, man," he whispered. "Did you have any ideas?" I shook my head, still shocked. "None. I can't believe she's kept this from me all along." Randolph squeezed my shoulder. "Hey, look on the bright side. This could be the final nail in Clive's coffin." I nodded slowly. "You're correct. Let's make sure those records arrive safely. I wouldn't be surprised if Clive tried something desperate." The following hour was tense as we waited for Susan's evidence to arrive. I couldn't help but notice Clive huddled with his attorneys. His face was a mask of barely contained panic. Good, I thought. Let him sweat when the court reconvened. The atmosphere was electric. Susan's records had come in. The prosecution team had been looking through them. The DA's face told me everything I needed to know. We got him. What ensued was a legal bloodbath. Email after email, recording after recording, exposing Clive's web of deception and manipulation. It was not just Susan. There were communications with other employees and companies as part of a massive fraud and coercion conspiracy. I watched Clive's face turn paler with each new piece of evidence. His lawyers appeared stunned, clearly unprepared for the turn of events. As the day went on, it became clear that the tide had shifted decisively in our favor. The jury's expressions changed from skepticism to outrage as the full extent of Clive's crimes became clear. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the judge concluded the day's proceedings. As we filed out of the courtroom, I noticed Clive being led away by his lawyers. For a brief moment, our gazes met, and I noticed something new about Clive Adams. Fear. Outside, amid a sea of reporters, I felt a hand on my arm. It was Susan. "Jason," she spoke softly. "Can we please talk?" I paused, torn between anger at her deception and gratitude for her eventual candor. Eventually, I nodded. "Okay, but not here." We discovered a quiet corner away from the media frenzy. Susan appeared exhausted. The weight of her secrets was finally lifted. "I'm so sorry," she began. "I know that doesn't even scratch the surface, but none of this was my intention." I exhaled. Why didn't you tell me about your financial problem, Susan? What about Clive's blackmail? We could have faced this together. She shakes her head. Tears welled in her eyes. I was scared and ashamed. I thought I could do it on my own, fix everything. Before anyone finds out. It was too late when I realized how deep I'd gotten. I felt a flash of old feelings for her, which were quickly replaced by memories of her betrayal. This is not an excuse, Susan. You still decided to have an affair, to lie to me for months. She whispered, I know, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But Jason, you must believe me. Everything I said in there today was true. Clive, he is a monster. He uses people and then discards them. I was simply another pawn in his game. I examined her face looking for any indication of deception, but I only saw exhaustion and remorse. Okay, I said, I finally believe you. But Susan, none of this changes our relationship. Too much has occurred. Too many lies. She nodded and wiped her eyes. I understand. I hope that one day you will forgive me. I watched her walk away. I felt a strange combination of emotions, relief that the truth had finally been revealed, anger at the years of deception, and sadness for what could have been. Randolph appeared by my side, his expression serious. You okay, man? I took a deep breath. I am squaring my shoulders. Yeah, I'm okay. It's been a long day, but we're almost done, Rand. We're so close to finishing this. He nodded with a smile on his face. Damn right, we are. Clive Adams is going down and we'll be there to watch him fall. As we walked away from the courthouse, I felt a weight lifted off my shoulders. The road ahead remained uncertain. The legal battle is far from over, but for the first time in months, I felt hopeful. Justice was finally within reach and I was determined to see it through to completion. The call came late one evening as I was preparing for another night of restless sleep. The number on my phone gave me pause. It was Shelley, Susan's mother. We hadn't spoken since the trial, and as I responded, I felt uneasy. Jason, it's Shelley. We need to talk. Can you meet me? Her voice was tight with tension and I felt my guard immediately rise. What is this about? Shelley? Not over the telephone. Thank you, Jason. It's important. 20 minutes later, I was settling into a booth at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. Shelley was already present. Her hands were wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. Her eyes darted nervously around the almost empty room. Thank you for coming, she said as I sat down. I didn't know who else to turn to. I studied her face, noticing the dark circles under her eyes and worried lines that were deeper than I remembered. What is going on, Shelley? Is it about Susan? She nodded. Her eyes filled with tears. Oh, Jason, I have been such a fool. We all do. What exactly are you talking about? Shelley took a deep breath. Her voice lowered to a whisper. Susan hasn't changed. All that remorse, the entire act during the trial, it was all a lie. I felt my jaw tighten and anger rise in my chest. What do you mean by a lie? She's been playing us, Jason. All of us, the apologies and tears. It was all about getting a fair divorce settlement and distancing herself from Clive's crimes. I leaned back, processing this data. Part of me was not even surprised. Susan's manipulative nature became clear to me after the fact. How do you know that? Shelley's gaze darted around the cafe again before she leaned in closer. Because she isn't alone. She has been seeing someone. Clive's brother, Jordan Adams, the name hit me like a punch in the stomach. I had heard of Jordan during the Clive investigation. He was known for being as ruthless as his brother, if not more so. Are you sure about this? I asked. My mind is already racing with implications. Shelley nodded miserably. I overheard their conversation there. Jason, they're planning something. Anything to do with you, I think. I believe they intend to hurt you. I sat back, my mind racing. Just when I thought the nightmare was finally over, it appeared that a new chapter was beginning. Why are you telling me this, Shelley? I inquired, scanning her face. Susan is your daughter? Tears streamed down her face because I cannot stand by and watch her destroy more lives. I should have spoken up sooner. Should have seen what was happening to Clive. I will not make that mistake again. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Thanks for informing me, Shelley. I know it couldn't have been easy. She nodded and wiped her eyes. Just take care, Jason. Susanna and Jordan, they are dangerous. I'm afraid of what they might do. As I left the cafe, my mind was already making plans. I needed to contact the authorities. I needed to protect myself. But first, I had to make a call. Randolph, it's me. We have a problem. I updated him on what Shelley had told me. My voice was tight with tension. Jesus Christ. Randolph. Just when we thought things were over. What is your plan, Jay? First things first, we need to contact the police. If Susan and Jordan are truly planning something, we must get ahead of it. Randolph commented on it. I could hear him frantically typing in the background. I'll start looking into Jordan Adams. See what I can find. Be careful, man. These individuals are bad news. I understand. I said, trust me. I am not taking any chances. The next morning, I found myself sitting across from Detective Simmons, the lead investigator in Clive's case. I outlined everything Shelley had told me. I watched as his expression became more serious with each passing minute. This is serious, Mr. Cooper. He said when I was finished, we will look into it right away. In the meantime, I would advise you to be extra cautious. Perhaps consider staying with a friend for a few days. I shake my head. No. I am not going to let them chase me out of my own house. Just keep me updated, okay? As I exited the police station, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every passing car, every stranger on the street appeared suspicious. I quickened my pace, eager to return to the relative safety of my home. But as the days passed and there was no sign of Susan or Jordan, I began to wonder if Shelley was mistaken. Perhaps she misunderstood what she had heard. Perhaps the attack caught me completely off guard. I was walking to my car after a long night at work. My mind was preoccupied with a challenging project. The parking lot was almost empty. The overhead lights cast long shadows on the asphalt. I heard the footsteps too late, and as I turned, a fist hit my jaw, sending me sprawling through the ringing in my ears. I heard a familiar voice. Hello, Jason. Miss me? I looked up, blinking away the stars in my vision, and saw Susan standing next to her. His fist is still clenched. I assumed this man was Jordan Adams. Susan, I spat and struggled to my feet. What the hell is this? She smiled, but her expression was cold and empty, sending chills down my spine. Consider this a warning. Darling, you should have left well alone. Jordan stepped forward, his bulk towering over me. You've cost my brother everything. He let out a growl. Now it's time to repay the favor. Before I could react, his fist slammed into my stomach, forcing the air out of my lungs. I doubled over, gasping as blow after blow fell on me through the Haze of pain. Susan's voice sounded cold and detached. If you go to the cops again or if you try to interfere with our plans in any way, let's just say this little encounter will look like a love tap in comparison. I must have passed out because the next thing I knew, I was alone in the parking lot. My body aching, the taste of blood in my mouth and trembling hands, I reached for my phone and dialed 911 while I waited for the ambulance. I felt a sense of determination settle in. Susan and Jordan might believe they would. One might think they'd scared me into submission, but they'd just made the worst mistake of their lives. This was not over. Definitely not. The hospital room was quiet except for the constant beep of the heart monitor and the low murmur of the TV in the corner. I lay there bruised and bandaged. My mind is racing with revenge plans. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Randolph entered, his face full of concern and barely contained rage. "Jesus, Jay," he said, noticing my battered appearance. "They did a number on you." I tried to sit up, wincing from the pain in my ribs. "They'll regret it." Randolph pulled up a chair and leaned in close. "I've done some research on Jordan Adams. This guy has bad news. Jay has connections to organized crime. Suspected in at least 2 murders, he makes Clive resemble a Boy Scout." I nodded. "All the more reason to bring him down. What are our next steps?" "Whoa." Rocky slowed down. "There," Randolph said, raising his hands. "You're in no shape to make any plans right now. You should rest. Recover." I shook my head, ignoring the sharp pain the movement caused. "There's no time for that. Susan and Jordan think they have me scared. I think I will back off. We need to strike while they are confident." Randolph gave me a long look, then nodded. "All right, what did you have in mind?" Randolph and I devised our strategy over the next few hours as nurses arrived and left. We followed Susan and Jordan's movements, gathered evidence of their criminal activities, and assembled a case that not even the best lawyer could undermine. "It's dangerous," Randolph said, as he prepared to leave. "If they get wind of what we're doing," I cut him off. "They will not. We'll be smarter this time. Be more careful." He nodded and gently squeezed my shoulder. "All right, man. I got your back. Take some rest. We have work to do." The following few weeks were a blur of activity. Randolph and I immediately began our investigation. After I was released from the hospital, we created a makeshift command center in my living room, with walls covered in photos, maps, and information scraps. Randolph's technical expertise proved invaluable. He was able to hack Susan's email, allowing us to see her communications with Jordan. What we discovered was chilling. "Look at this," Randolph said one evening, pointing to his laptop screen. "They plan to leave the country, fake passports, new identities, and the works." I leaned in, scanning the email exchange. "When, 3 days from now, they're booked on a flight to Buenos Aires." I felt a surge of adrenaline. "Then we've got 3 days to nail them." "Can you track their movements?" Randolph grinned, cracking his knuckles already on it. "I've got a trace on Susan's phone. Wherever they go, we'll know about it." As the day of their planned departure drew nearer, the tension ratcheted up. We barely slept, subsisting on coffee and takeout as we pieced together our case. Finally, the morning of their flight arrived. Randolph and I sat in my car outside Susan's apartment, watching as she and Jordan loaded suitcases into a taxi. "This is it," I said, starting the engine as the taxi pulled away. "You ready for this?" Randolph nodded. "Born ready? Let's nail these bastards." We followed at a discreet distance, my hands tight on the steering wheel as we near the airport. I felt a familiar surge of anger and determination. This ends today, I thought. Suddenly Randolph grabbed my arm. They're pulling over. Sure enough, the taxi had stopped at a gas station just a few miles from the airport. I watched as Jordan got out, heading inside the store. This might be our only chance. I spoke, my voice tense. We must confront them now before they disappear. Randolph looked at me with concern in his eyes. Are you sure about this, Jay? Perhaps we should call the police. Let them handle it. I shake my head. There's no time. It's now or never. Before Randolph could protest further, I was out of the car and striding purposefully towards the taxi. Susan saw me approaching, her eyes widening in fear and surprise. Jason? She gasped when I yanked open the taxi door. What are you doing here? I grabbed her arm and pulled her out of the car. Finally, this is over. Jordan demonstrates how to exit the store. He froze for a split second when he noticed me. Then his face contorted into rage. You, he roared and charged towards us. What followed was a blur of fists and fury. Jordan was bigger and stronger, but I was fueled by months of bottled-up rage and betrayal. We grappled on the asphalt as Susan screamed for us to stop. We traded blows. I tasted blood in my mouth and felt the sting from split knuckles, but I did not give up. All of the pain and humiliation of the previous year poured out of me as I rained blows down on Jordan's face. In the distance, I heard sirens. Randolph must have called the cops after all. Good. Let's see what these two are truly capable of. As the police cars sped into the gas station parking lot, I delivered one last devastating punch to Jordan's jaw. He fell limp beneath me and I staggered to my feet. My chest is heaving. A voice called out. Jason Cooper. I turned to see Detective Simmons approaching with his hand on his holster. Please step away from him. I raised my hands. Take a step back. Detective, I'm glad you could join us. As the officers swarmed around us, they handcuffed Jordan and Susan. I felt a strange sense of calm come over me. It was over. Finally. Truly over. Randolph appeared at my side and handed me a bottle of water. You okay, man? I nodded, wincing as I sipped. My body ached, but in a good way. The ache of victory. Yeah. I'm good. We watched as Susan and Jordan were loaded into separate police cars and driven away. I felt my anger drain away, replaced by a profound sense of relief. Come on, Randolph said, clapping my shoulder. Let us get you cleaned up. We have one hell of a story to tell. The courtroom was packed with a low buzz of conversation filling the air as we waited for the proceedings to start. I sat in the front row with Randolph beside me. My hands were tightly clasped in my lap, hiding their trembling. The door opened and a hush fell over the room as Susan and Jordan were led in, both pale and disheveled in their prison jumpsuits. Susan's eyes met mine for a brief moment, and I caught a glimpse of something. Regret. Fear. I couldn't tell. And I honestly didn't care. All rise. The bailiff called out as the judge entered the courtroom. The trial began. I listened with satisfaction as the prosecutor presented the case against Susan and Jordan. The evidence we had gathered, combined with the testimony of several witnesses, painted a damning picture of their actions. Your Honor, the prosecutor stated clearly, the state will prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendants, Susan Cooper and Jordan Adams, conspired to commit fraud, assault, and attempted murder. I felt a surge of pride when Randolph was called to the stand. He testified regarding our investigation. His voice remained steady as he described the evidence we had uncovered as the trial progressed. I observed Susan's and Jordan's faces. Jordan remained stoic. His jaw clenched, but Susan appeared to crumble with each new piece of evidence presented. Finally, it was my turn to testify. As I took the stand, I felt a rush of adrenaline. This was it. My chance to share my story to see justice done. Mr. Cooper, the prosecutor here, started. Can you tell the court about the night you were assaulted? I took a deep breath before recounting the events of that night in the parking lot. As I spoke, I noticed Susan flinch. Her eyes filled with tears, but I felt no sympathy. Only a cold determination to see things through. So what happened after the attack? The prosecutor inquired. I was in the hospital, I said, my voice steady, but as soon as I was released, I realized I needed to do something. These people were not about to stop, so Randolph and I started our own investigation. The defense attempted to discredit our testimony, portraying Susan and Jordan as victims of circumstance. However, their efforts were ineffective in the face of overwhelming evidence against them. As the trial approached its conclusion, I found myself holding my breath. Will the jury see through Susan's tears? Will justice finally be served, despite Jordan's stoic facade? The wait for the verdict was excruciating. Days passed, each seeming longer than the last. Finally, we were summoned back to the courtroom as the jury foreman stood. I felt Randolph's hand on my shoulder, a silent show of support for the fraud conspiracy charge. We found the defendants guilty. I let out a breath. I had no idea I was holding the charge of assault. We found the defendants guilty. Susan let out a sob. Her shoulders shook from the attempted murder charge. We found the defendants guilty. It was over. They were going away for a long time. The judge read Jordan's sentence of 25 years and Susan's sentence of 15 years. I felt a weight lifted off my shoulders. It was finished. Finally, truly completed. Outside the courthouse, surrounded by reporters, I experienced a strange mix of emotions: relief, exhaustion, and satisfaction. Mr. Cooper, how are you feeling about the verdict? A reporter yelled, thrusting a microphone into my face. I paused to carefully consider my words. Finally, I said, justice was served. This is all I have to say. As I pushed through the crowd with Randolph by my side, I noticed Shelley standing at the edge of the throng. When our eyes met, I saw a mix of grief and relief in her expression. I gave her a small nod, recognizing her role in bringing this chapter to a close. You okay, man? Randolph asked as we walked to the car. I nodded, feeling the tension of the previous months begin to subside. Yes, I think I am. The following few weeks were a blur as I tried to adjust to life after the trial. When the media frenzy subsided, I was confronted with a future I had never imagined possible. Randolph stopped by one evening while I was sitting on my back porch, nursing a beer. So, he said, settling into a chair beside me, what comes next for Jason Cooper? I took a long pull from my bottle to consider the question. Honestly, I'm not sure. For so long, everything revolved around Susan, Clive, and Jordan. I am not sure I remember how to simply live my life. Randolph nodded, understandingly. So, have you considered getting out of town for a while? What about a fresh start and all? The idea took root in my mind and became more appealing by the second. You know what? That is not a bad idea. The plan came together over the course of a few days. I decided to sell my home, quit my job, and relocate to a small coastal town several hours away. A place where no one knew my name or story. As I packed my belongings, I came across Old photographs of Susan and me in happier times. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of not regret, but sadness for what could have been. Then I remembered everything that had happened, and the feeling subsided. I threw the photos away without looking twice. The day of my departure was bright and clear. Randolph came to see me off and helped me load the last of my boxes into my truck. "Are you sure about this?" he asked as we stood in my now empty driveway. I nodded, feeling more confident than I had in months. "Yes, Randy, I need a fresh start." He pulled me into a bear hug. "I am going to miss you, man. Don't be a stranger, okay?" "I won't, as I promised. And hey, you're welcome to come visit at any time. I hear the fishing is great down there." As I drove away watching my old life fade in the rearview mirror, I felt a sense of possibility that I hadn't felt in years. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time I was excited about the journey. Weeks later, I stood on a cliff above the ocean. The wind whipped through my hair. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks as I watched the waves crash, ushering in a new chapter low. I felt my anger and bitterness drain away. I thought about Susan, Clive, and Jordan, and all of the pain and betrayal of the previous year. But the memories could no longer hurt me. They were exactly that, memories. As the last rays of sunlight dipped below the horizon, another chapter in my life came to a close. I smiled for the first time in what seemed like forever. I was at peace. The future stretched out before me, full of possibilities, and I was ready to accept whatever it brought. I turned away from the ocean view and returned to my new home. My footsteps are light and purposeful. The old Jason Cooper, the man defined by his pain and desire for vengeance, had vanished. In his place stood a man who had survived the storm and emerged stronger on the opposite side. As I approached my front door, I paused for a moment to look back at the darkening sky. "Hello, Susan," I whispered, not with malice or regret but with certainty. Then I stepped inside, closing the door on the past and opening it to whatever the future might bring. The wages of betrayal had been paid. It was time to collect, with the promise of a new beginning. Thank you for listening to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also leave a comment below with your thoughts on what happened. Take care.